Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Parent Council Couples Night Out, How to Play Fair with Your Partner. We want to begin the evening by wishing all those who are ill in our community and in the larger community a refuah shlema, and express our condolences to all those who have lost loved ones during this difficult time. We stand together as a community. We also want to thank and recognize all of the amazing healthcare professionals and those who are on the front lines and literally doing God's work. You keep healthy and safe. And now to the evening that you've come to watch. We're here to discuss how to play fair with your partner, finding your why, and the dangers of the invisible work. This discussion is based on the best-selling book and card game by New York Times best-selling author Eve Rodsky. Now, we are privileged to have one of our ninth grade parents, Aliza Licht. She had Eve Rodsky as a recent guest on her podcast, Leave Your Mark. Hopefully you've listened to it. So we thought that this would be a very interesting topic to bring to the larger Ramaz community. And so that's exactly what we've done this evening with the help of the Ramaz Parents Council and Aliza Licht. So I'm going to introduce you to the panel tonight. We'll start with Aliza Licht. Aliza is the founder and president of Leave Your Mark LLC, which is a creative brand marketing and digital strategy consultancy. She's also the author of the best-selling book, Leave Your Mark, and the host of the Leave Your Mark podcast, which offers fresh career advice every Sunday. Leave Your Mark has been translated into Spanish, to Chinese, and into Russian. It is ranked number 8 in the Book Authority's 100 Best Career Development Books of All Time. And she writes a career advice column on Forbes.com and was dubbed one of America's next top mentors by the New York Times. She also has an amazing ninth grade son who we absolutely adore, Jonathan.
Thank you.
And now to our other panelists, Rabbi Daniel and Rachel Kraus. They are the co-directors of community education at KJ, Congregation Kibbutz Jeshurun, and Daniel is the Associate Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at the Birthright Israel Foundation. He leads strategic alliances, partnerships, and manages the post-trip engagement strategy for Birthright Israel alumni and brand experience for the foundation. Prior to being at Birthright Israel, Daniel served as the inaugural director of the Manhattan Jewish Experience, known as MJE, in downtown location, where he spearheaded the creation of the community of young Jewish professionals and created a hub of Jewish engagement in Midtown Manhattan. And then over to Rachel Kraus, who worked for 13 years in real estate development and retail for Westfield, where she led business development, brand positioning, and partnership marketing for the U.S. portfolio and special global projects, including the 2012 Olympic Games in London and founding partners for the World Trade Center development. Most recently, she was the vice president of marketing, where she led marketing strategy, brand experience, and strategic partnerships for the World Trade Center retail development. They also, Rachel and Daniel, have been featured in the 2017 36 Under 36 of the emerging Jewish leaders. Since then, they have emerged. They are Jewish leaders. So they're not emerging in our book. They've emerged. And we are also very proud to say that they're parents of 4 amazing children, one of whom, Akira, is in our 6th grade at Ramaz. So it's great to have you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving your time to this. And now right over to what we're here to talk about tonight. So we'll start with a question. Aliza, could you tell us something about Eve Rodsky, and why did you decide to invite Eve onto your podcast? What drew you to the content and to what Eve talks about?
Sure. Well, thank you, Kenny, first of all, for the wonderful introduction. So happy that you're moderating tonight. And Rabbi and Rachel, so glad to panel with you. So Eve Rodsky was an author that I knew about. She's a New York Times bestselling author. And I knew that Reese Witherspoon had featured Fair Play in her book club and had signed a deal with her for their production company. And it turns out that my very dear friend, Jillian Strauss, who was my media trainer, also trained Eve. So when I was talking about Eve's book, she was like, oh, I'm going to introduce you to her. So we ended up having a conversation, and I started to think about how important home life and childcare is to the success journey, right? And now, especially with the pandemic, you know, it used to be that the family was invisible, right? It's like you had your work life, you couldn't show your kids, like God forbid a kid came on a Zoom, if you had a meeting, like that was hidden. And now that we're all home together, the tables have shifted, and the amount of work, both in home and childcare, that falls on the female specifically is very disproportionate. So Eve set out to really uncover the $10.9 trillion industry of invisible work, meaning work a female does in her home for their home life or childcare that is invisible to her husband. And she wrote a list, an Excel sheet, and she wrote down every single thing she does that her husband has no idea she does. And then she started passing the sheet around, and she passed it to Reese Witherspoon, and Reese added to it. And it went to thousands and thousands of women who started writing down all the things they do that they don't get credit for, that take countless hours. And then she realized this is a Harvard Law trained mediator. This is a hardcore professional who basically lost her sort of mojo because she became someone so overwhelmed with the home life and the childcare that she essentially felt like she needed to quit her job. And then she realized that her very wonderful husband that she had married, who was a great partner, became less of a partner after children. So she set out to develop a system to change that dynamic.
So how does it work? What is her system?
So her whole concept is conception, planning, and execution. So Rabbi, if you are the dad that takes your kids to soccer practice on Sunday, right? And all the moms are there, let's just say, and they see you come and they're like, oh my God, look at Rabbi Daniel. He's so great. He's taking his kids to soccer practice. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, Rachel has figured out the kids' schedule, has printed out the 75-page form, has filled out the credit card, has figured out which of the friends want to do the be on the soccer team, have figured out where the uniform is, has made sure the uniform's washed, packed, and ready, and then you show up on the field and you're the hero, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. But Eve's whole concept is owning the conception, the planning, and the execution. So in her book and in her game, which is 100 playing cards that you reshuffle every week, you would own kids' sports. And then Rachel wouldn't have to think about kids' sports at least for the month or however long you decide to have that card. And what that does is free up time. And her whole premise, this took her 7 years to write, you guys. So she has worked with professors and scientists around the world to develop this book and thousands of interviews with couples. Men's time is viewed as finite and women's time is viewed as sand, infinite. So she's trying to reshuffle that balance.
Okay. Wow. Okay. How did her husband react to this book, Aliza?
So she basically wrote this like 19,000 megabyte Excel sheet, right? It was legitimately 98 tabs. And she emailed her husband with the attachment with the subject line, "Can't wait to discuss." And I should mention that what triggered this entire spreadsheet was she had just given birth to their third child. She was busy doing her mediation law stuff. She was returning baby gifts to a store. She was picking up groceries. And she gets home and he texts her and he's like, "I can't believe you forgot the blueberries." And she lost it. And that was the impetus for like, what has her life become, where she feels so overwhelmed, and he thinks she's doing God knows what, and how could she possibly forget the blueberries? Like, what else are you doing? And that was the impetus. So he responded with the monkey emoji that covers the eyes, okay? But he's a great sport. They sat down, you know, when they had private time, and she explained, I don't know if you realize, but it takes me X amount of hours to do this. And she took him through the whole thing, and it's become a movement now, big time.
Wow. So what's the way the game is played? What's the goal, and how is this game played? The game itself, fair play.
So it's not about an equitable split, right? It's really about the conception, planning, and execution. So it's 100, she made playing cards. It's 100 tasks that we all do. And every week you reshuffle them and you get the cards you get, and you know that you're responsible for the whole journey of that task.
So I'm going to ask Rabbi and Rachel, when you first learned about this fair play and heard about, what was your reaction to the concept of this, the conception, planning, and execution, CPE, as they say? If you read the book or if you listen to the podcast, you'll understand. But what was your reaction to it?
So CPE, I didn't read the full book, full disclosure, but I enjoyed the podcast and sort of read segments. I think for me, the CPE notion is something that's really just in my DNA. Like, things have to get done, and who's going to divide, and how we're going to do it, and how we're going to conquer that task at hand. And I think, you know, when I thought about this and sort of where that DNA stems from, and I think equally for Rachel, it comes from our parents and our grandparents. They're doers, and they, you know, whatever task was thrown at them, whatever challenge they had to overcome, they knew there was one goal, which is to get it done. And therefore, that sort of, we both grew up in a very similar experience with parents modeling that stuff had to get done. And, you know, you just divide and conquer. And I think it's really very natural for me.
Yeah, and I think also part of the wisdom of her positioning in her book, and this particular format and structure and model, is built off of what works in corporations. It's built off of what works within companies. So what you're digging into are functional responsibilities that are split between employees. So we know that a massive ship needs to be moved, and objective needs to be achieved, and goals need to be met, and strategies need to be developed and executed. So within the work context, it's so intuitive. It's like, of course, there's a job description. I know what I have to do, and I have to execute, and I have to kind of, you know, serve the whole 360-degree approach to making sure that particular task gets done. So when she brilliantly frames it against that backdrop, there's also kind of an intuitive understanding of like, oh yeah, that does make sense. And when you can adopt that format and that methodology and apply it into the home environment, it has a very intuitive and almost kind of and I don't know, it's an understanding that is kind of, again, intuitive to the home.
Yeah, I think you said it so brilliantly. I think her whole point, like, she literally Googled organizational management for the home, and all she could find was how to organize your junk drawer. So she feels the home is our most important organization, which I think we can all agree with, but yet we don't have a strategy for that. And well, you guys sound like you have a better strategy than most, but in her interviews with people, 99% of the men she interviewed said they really resent home life because they feel like they're always being nagged. Well, if you know what's on your plate, if you know your job description, like you know your job description at work, you're just going to do it. You're going to execute on it, and you're going to make sure you've done the conception and planning.
Well, can one of you give us an example, or how you actually translate this in real life? Since Rachel and Daniel, you're on, could you tell us how it works? You have 4 children, varied in age, and you got lots of home responsibility, and you're both very high level professionals who have not just jobs during the day, but jobs at night. Tell us, how do you do this?
So I think there's a couple of golden rules that work for us, that you know, certainly not secrets, but things that sort of a foundational core weekly, monthly, annual elements of the house that really keep it working fluidly and really make the engine run. One is like Sunday evening is always planning for the week. And it doesn't matter if there's a work event or a simcha or something. At some point before you hit the sack on Sunday night, you have to look and explore the week ahead and sync and know exactly who's coming home early this night, who's doing that, what are other responsibilities. So there's can be no midday crisis texting. Of course, emergencies happen, things change. But the weekly calendar, as planned out on Sunday, is sort of one golden rule for us. We live and die by the calendar, and we each know if it's not in the calendar, it's not happening.
It's not real.
It just can't be real. We have a shared calendar. Have a shared calendar. It's color coded. We can argue about the colors at a different time, but if it's not in the calendar, it doesn't happen. And I'm a junkie for all the digital solutions. I mean, they're there. Some of them are free. Some of them are subscription based, but it lives in the cloud. It lives in Evernote. It lives in Google Drive. It's accessible anywhere, anytime. And by using all those pieces together, the engine really runs. We don't have, and I think it's sort of from day one, there are really no gender roles in this household. There's tasks that
Except
they
I
get
had
done.
the kids.
That's fair.
Happy to hear that, Rachel.
That's everyone knows.
But there's, in terms of the varying tasks that have to happen on a daily, weekly basis, and that sort of model exists on a monthly basis and a biannual basis, and we can expand thereafter.
So I'm also a big fan of rock, paper, scissors, which has also done wonders. But so a couple of interesting things also just off of what Daniel was mentioning. The general 80-20 principle, which is applied, I think, throughout all different areas in people's lives, whether it's health or fitness, just that 80% of the time there's predictable, expected, and then there's the 20% margin of error, which is kind of the give and take on either side, that there will be things that come up that are unexpected, and there will be things that come up that kind of throw the schedule or throw the expectations off, but to be prepared for how we manage kind of the margin or the fringe. But as a general rule, that Sunday planning really serves as the 80% bulk of the week. So the other thing that for us that's been very helpful is the zone strategy versus man-to-man defense. So not just in terms of once we had our third kid moving from man-to-man to zone, that's important to do, but also treating everything from a perspective of a zone, that you have a certain area that you cover. We know in any basketball game of any sort, you have to also roll with the punches and the strategies on the offensive side.
It doesn't work in the cricket analogy, but I've come to learn the basketball analogy.
Right, no basketball in Australia. But that playing that zone, it doesn't mean you don't cover other areas, but you have a territory. You're supposed to cover your area and be able to pivot when necessary, but as again, that general 80-20 split.
That's great. By the way, I just want to let all the participants know that at the bottom of your screens, although you can't speak or be seen, there's a Q&A button, and we welcome people to put questions into the Q&A, and we will pose them to the panelists, and they will be very happy to answer questions, no matter how controversial they might be. That was part of the sign-off on the agreement before they agreed to do this evening. But let me ask you, Aliza, how do you and David manage household and childcare responsibilities?
So first of all, I mean, Rabbi and Rachel, you guys are the perfect people to be on this panel right now. I love listening to both of you. So David and I also live by calendar notices, and I put everything on his calendar. We don't have the Sunday night meeting because our zones are very clear. I generally have the kids also. My kids are older now, so the kids have the kids for the most part, and I just hover around. But there's certain areas it's really clear. I know I do anything car related, as an example. Cars, I love cars. That's my area. He's going to do anything billing related, example. He's also in charge of travel. Not that we're going anywhere in the foreseeable future, but he books and I can give input, but he's booking all of that. So we have a division of labor. I think one of the premises of this whole thing is clearly defined expectations. If you establish those and you understand, going back to the premise and title of this talk, understand the why, why something has to get done a certain way, why it has to get done, when it needs to get done, then you're setting people up for success.
I guess just as a follow-up to some of what you said, so what do each of you think about the 100 household tasks that can be divided up between two parents or adults and reshuffled every week? What do you think of that gameplay? That you take the 100 tasks, you shuffle them, and then they get divvied?
So I will tell you from Eve's point of view, a lot, and maybe some people who are listening right now feel this way. A lot of the women that she interviewed felt that this was a trigger conversation with their husband. And they felt like, even though they knew, and most of these women are in the world are doing 2/3 of like the home life childcare part, they felt like they couldn't broach this topic. And a lot of women would say things like, well, my husband makes more money than I do, so he needs more time off. Or I don't work, my husband works, so of course I'm gonna take care of all these things. And the whole reason, the inspiration for all of this is she's trying to motivate women to find what she calls their unicorn space and to tap back into the passions and interests they had before the kids took over. So I think it's really just about, it's not so much, listen, I mean, to be totally honest, like David and I do not divide 100 tasks a week. That's not how we work. But I think the point is to really set the stage that both of your time is equal and how you spend it is important. And if you can figure out a way, like you both have done, to sort of set expectations, you'll have time for the things that you want to do.
So go to that. Rachel, Daniel, can you talk about your, what I guess we're calling the unicorn space? You know, do you feel you have your unicorn space? How do you define that for yourselves?
You have your unicorn space?
Yeah, in Manhattan, it's just smaller. I'm kidding. But yeah, yes, unicorn space is key. So to be able to have that kind of space of self, for mind, for spirit, for inspiration, for growing. So one of the things that Daniel and I have done, and we introduced this, I think even before we got married, like while we were dating, was the same way that in the business world you have KPIs and you have a performance review and you have goal setting that is not just individual goal setting, but it's also company goal setting. And your bonus is tied not just to what you do, but to how the company performs or to how the department performs. So it's not just tied to yourself. And that's actually been a trend that's evolved within the business world over the past few years, where it's gone a lot more into in kind of the communal responsibility, not just the self. So a person's individual performance, you're not just rewarded based on that, but there's an element of tied to kind of the greater cause and the greater good and the greater goals of the company. So one of the things that Daniel and I have done is we've introduced a kind of a quarterly check-in. So where we set certain goals for ourselves personally, professionally, in terms of our relationship, in terms of children. Obviously the children was an evolving story. It wasn't, the same 15 years ago as it is today. But that once a quarter, we have a specific night that we establish, and it's a few hours, and we come prepared for the meeting.
It's not always a date night, sometimes it's date morning.
Right, it varies the time of day, but that we come prepared with where we are and how we're tracking in terms of our own growth. And it's so easy to get lost in the chaos, in the noise, in the tactics, in kind of the clinical operating function of day-to-day life. It's clinical and it's operational and it's tactical. But to be able to zoom back out, we're in a Zoom world now, but to be able to zoom back out and say, this is what I wanted to accomplish personally, professionally, emotionally, spiritually, and how am I tracking for me, between myself, between me and my partner, and for me is in my broader role, whether that's as a mom, as a daughter, as a sister, but to be able to have a place to look at myself holistically, to make sure that unicorn space that we've thoughtfully established for ourselves is actually coming to fruition and has an avenue to actualize.
And I think, well said, agreed. Yes. I certainly think that we view like the house has a job description, and it's a varying list of things that have to get done. And it moves depending on time availability, skill set, but there's never a task that is solely pushed onto the other person. It really depends on the week at hand, the job at hand, what else is happening. I remember so clearly, I didn't grow up in this environment. I grew up in a very European household. So my father, I really rarely saw getting up from the table and helping, and that's sort of the modeling he had from his parents. And I remember so clearly our first time my parents came for a Shabbat meal to our home. We're living in Teaneck, and we're having soup, we made kiddush, and a wonderful Shabbos meal. We were so excited. We cooked everything set up beautifully, and I got up to clear the soup bowls from the table, and my dad nearly fell off his chair because he'd never ever seen that. He's like, what sort of a son did I raise, and why are you cleaning the dishes from the table? And we joke about it now as a family, but it's sort of, there are things that have to get done, and it doesn't matter who, where, or what, and the job description is the household.
Yeah, I think also, so there are also the things that we don't plan for and the things that we do plan for. So I know, for example, when I went back to school to get my MBA, so fun story that I actually took my GMAT 4 days before our first child was born, which was so fun. And then I started my MBA with a 1-year-old and then had 2 children born during the program. And I was working full time, and Daniel and I were building kind of the MGE community down. There was like a ton going on. In that time frame, and very thoughtfully planned for, Daniel took over 95% of household-oriented, 98%, fine. We argue about the 3%. But the majority of that task, and I finished my MBA in May, and Daniel started his MBA in August. So at that point, the pendulum, it shifted back, and I took over 98% of what had to be done. There's a little bit of the give and take for the planned stuff. But then there's also, like, when Daniel and I first got married, Daniel was very ill about a year after we got married. And that we didn't plan for that. And we had to reformat and, and think through things, because with all the capabilities and the things that Daniel was amazing at, he just couldn't do between treatment and hospital visits and whatever. He wasn't able to do it. So there's also the strength of this structure is also predicated on the strength of the relationship, and knowing that you're both in this, and the intuition and the sharing and the love languages and the communication styles. And it's predicated on that, because there will be unexpected curveballs that also need to be attended to, and the tasks don't change. Those things still have to get done, even if the players have different capabilities in any given time frame.
So well said.
And I think
you have anything you wanted? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add, I think sort of, when I think through the lens of sort of the people that we live with, which is the 4 amazing children, there's so much benefit for them to see this in real time and play. And that, we're modeling for them as parents in everything we do, in everything we say, in how we act. And for them to see that, one day I'm in the kitchen, and, one day I'm doing the laundry, and I'm teaching my 11-year-old how to use the dryer. And it doesn't matter that it's me or Rachel. And, and just to look a little bit fast forward into this week's Torah portion, the opening sentence has a beautiful insight into this. It says, Emor laKohanim b'nei Aaron v'amarta alihem. And it's a double language of Emor and Marta. And Rashi, the famous commentator, says, Lahazir Gedolim al Haktanim, for the older Kohanim, the older priests, to show the younger priests and to model for them. And that's what we're doing. We're illuminating a pathway for the next generation and modeling for them in so many ways. And I think for us, that's really a core value, that the kids see that in real time and understand that, and hopefully can take that and form that as part of their own identity when they grow older as well.
Yeah. And that was so wonderfully said. And I think, just to add to all of that, the reason why, going back to your original question, Kenny, Eve decided to gamify it is because she uses cards in mediation for these very, very, very high net worth. Like, if you watch Succession, those are her clients. And it's war all the time in those kinds of families. And the playing cards work in mediation. So that is why she developed a system based off that.
So I guess I want to just follow up with Daniel and Rachel, and Aliza. It would be really interesting to hear your reaction to this as well. But in terms of religious growth for children, spiritual growth, and how you balance that as parents as well, and how that works within a household.
So I think that it's an amazing question, very thoughtful question. So I think Judaism in particular is ritualistically based, and the rituals and the practices and the hand-on tactics are all manifestations and expressions of deep value systems. So these are not just things we do that mark our Jewish tradition. These are things we do that mark Jewish values. So making Kiddush on Shabbat as a tactical, practical, clinical thing that is done on a Friday night is not about making Kiddush. It's about what creating a moment of sanctification is. What does it mean to demarcate a Friday afternoon versus a Friday night? How do you institute and bring in holiness into your home? So the rituals and the practices that we have are very, especially for children, are there's almost a built-in appetite for curiosity to do those things and to feel those things and to touch those things. And when that starts to become part of experiential practice, that creates an imprint on the soul that has unbelievable effects on who we are, cultivating our value systems and cultivating and orienting where our values and where our mindset lives. So for us, like even like I make challah every week. It's not amazing. It's okay. Zamex is probably better.
I've had your challah. It's
okay,
pretty good.
it's really okay.
It's the effort, Rachel. It's the effort.
It's like, right, but we make with our kids every single week. And what we do is, with all of them, they wash hands first. It's all hands in. Every kid is saying a different blessing, or every kid is interpreting what sugar means to them that week. How do we institute sweetness into our week? How do we look at the yeast as the bubbling agent and create
Secret recipe.
Yeast goes into challah. And how do you create this kind of bubbled over excitement and excavate that from us? And it becomes discussion points. Then your hands are in the challah, and it's a family activity, and we're doing it together, and it becomes something we talk about and something that really concretizes action and belief in one. And when that starts to happen, it's magical in terms of the types of conversations that evolve, the depth of connection that is not just around activity, but really around Masorah and tradition and what we're part of. And it's like, for us, it's a juxtaposition of action and belief that magnificently walk hand in hand, where the actions concretize a very strong belief system.
And I would just add that this pandemic that we're living through, and in many ways zooming through, is really magnifying this in a way that is certainly unprecedented in all of our lives. But for us, sort of, we're lapping it up and loving it, because the ability to, and we love, everything that happens on a normal Shabbat, and please God that day shall come soon when we can go back to shul and go back to entertaining and going out and community and things that we love to so deeply, but also the fact that we're all home and we have to reinvent prayer together, and what does that look like, and the modeling aspect of that. And we're home all the time together. The kids see me or Rachel stopping and praying and learning and preparing, and it's there's no hiding. We're in a Manhattan apartment, and it's a beautiful magnified ability to sort of really take this ability to imbue spirituality and to thoughtfully think about it in a very rare and interesting reality.
Everything you're saying is so, I just agree with everything. I would just add to it, listen, obviously I practice a little differently in our home. And I think every Jewish ritual that we all do comes down to one thing, which is the foundational values that we want our kids to grow up with. And I so agree with you, Rabbi, that the pandemic and this slowing down time of like self-reflection is also a key ingredient of this, because we would never take this time otherwise full time. I mean, what are we on, day 60 now or 58? And I think that in a way Judaism provides, it's so funny, if you think about it this way, like that's the organizational management of our lives. That is the structure that we work within. And listen, people love rituals. It's like your morning coffee is a ritual. That is religion too, to a lot of people, and it's how you sort of set your day. And I think that I really do believe that Jewish children are so fortunate to, especially if they're getting, the kind of Jewish education that our children are, to be able to get this strong foundation from the start, and not just when they're in college or in, getting their master's, when they're in the mood to like education. It's starting from when they're babies and up. So I think it's incredibly important to really appreciate and value that.
So since the Krauses just really described the way in which they approach this, I want to just go back to the fair play and sort of ask about it, because that was not everyone has that yet. How do you what do you think are the benefits of fair play, and what are the negative sides of fair play as is described in this podcast and in the book?
So that's a great question. So first of all, I just want to state a fact. After children, men do 5 to 15 hours less in the home. So there's more to be done, right, with kids, but it is a fact that they tend to do 5 to 15 hours less. So fair play gives you an opportunity to sort of stage this discussion, to talk about how you spend your time and how you want to spend your time. And I think one of the key learnings, and Eve, you know, it took her 7 years to write this book, because one of the reasons that she waited was she wanted to implement the system with thousands of couples, see the results. And in the book, there is a chapter on frequently asked questions of things that go wrong when you fair play your life. And I think that that was really responsible, because if you listen to the podcast, there is one woman who called her, a Jewish woman actually. She was like the head of, not the UJA, but somewhere, and left her a message. Eve didn't know her, and she was like, I just want to let you know, I'm leaving my husband because of your book. So she didn't want to like start this firestorm without providing solution and understanding sort of the repercussions of these conversations. So essentially, one of the things that she has found is key to this is no feedback in the moment. So no feedback in the moment. So we all have moments where our spouse does something and we're like, you know, you want to just like nitpick in that second. So what she would do is just sort of channel that all internally. And then when emotion was low and cognition is high, which generally is when you're not at home with like 75 kids running around and the TV blaring and the phone ringing, she would address those things. And it's funny because on the podcast, I do say that this is something I've always done with in my own relationship with what I call back pocket, which is a similar concept, which is to, when something annoys you or something you want to address, but you know there's not going to be an open to listen in that second, to just put it in your back pocket and wait for either a time that you feel like is the right time, or my favorite, wait for it to happen again. So then you can show a pattern of behavior. Then you can be like, and by the way, you also did that 1 month ago on January 3rd. That's the same thing. So I think that the book is really comprehensive because she understands these are really hard conversations to have. And in fairness, you know, I said to her, your husband sounds like a saint. To be like the living example of this book, and this is thousands upon thousands of readers at this point, and people who participated. And, you know, she said, like, she has a great husband. She has a great partner, but she lost herself after kids. And this is how she wanted to work her way back to finding herself and capturing that passion in that unicorn space again.
I think it's great. You know, it's that we had many people, Daniel and Rachel, who are asking, do Daniel and Rachel ever fight? And if so, what does that look like in this model? What happens?
A Zoom meeting.
So it's funny.
How does that work?
Yes, there are disagreements. You know, one practice, and I really honestly forget where I saw it. And every time I'm blessed to officiate at a wedding, and we walk with the couple and we journey with them to the chuppah, one of the final couple sessions, I give them a packet of 10 red noses. And the strategy is to place them at various places around your apartment. So certainly one in the nightstand, in the bedroom, one in the kitchen, one in the study. And whenever there is an agreement, and this speaks exactly to what Aliza said, it's the same principle as the back pocket. Whenever there's disagreement, turn around, put on a red nose, and in that moment, if there's laughter, you really diffuse the situation and you take the tension out of the air, because sometimes it's blown up out of proportion and you forget what really is the challenge, but you're so angered by whatever struck the flame and hit the chord that you forget exactly why you're even upset and what's really there. So if you look around our house, there are red noses everywhere.
One of the other interesting things is that this, as a structural solution, is also a catalyst for depth and conversation. And one of the things that she brings up and touches upon is that there are deep ways that we've been conditioned: nature versus nurture versus all these different input sources. But there are reasons that certain things kind of, you know, serve as getting our goat more than others? Like, why is it that one thing bothers one person more than another? And how do you become more sensitive? And there are certain parts that this actually becomes an exercise of curiosity and self-exploration, and hopefully vulnerability and sharing. Because it could be that there's some deep part that we are, you know, about our upbringing. One of the examples that she gives was that taking the garbage out. And for her, it was such a psychological and mental gymnastics activity for her. It was something so deeply painful for her. And her husband just didn't have that same conditioning. So it's not that he doesn't understand her. He didn't know that that was something to understand. So as part of this process, to look at the pinch points in the system, what does sit as tension between a particular couple, and for every couple, those 100+ tasks, because it's plus. Because what are the ones that actually are more tension induced, and why are they more tension induced? And what that becomes is a catalyst for growth trajectory, for digging into the recesses of another human being to uncover, unearth, excavate, and underscore what is it that makes them uniquely who they are, and how do we become more sensitive to their needs, become better listeners to their needs, and ultimately hopefully be able to shift behaviors to meet the needs of our partner.
Absolutely. And just to give a little color to what Rachel was saying, just so people understand, Eve grew up in a single, her mom was a single mom, and she basically was a latchkey kid. And the garbage, they didn't have a garbage in their apartment. So her mother would hang like a little plastic bag on the knob of the cabinet, and it would constantly be overflowing with garbage, to the point that they had bugs everywhere. And when she would be eating breakfast and they would be Rice Krispies, her mother would tell her they were Cocoa Krispies, because there would literally be bugs in her cereal. So when she sees garbage piling up, it is a trigger back to that. So once Seth, her husband, understood why she was so panicked about the garbage, and by the way, could she take it out every 2 seconds? Of course, but then she's spending her whole time taking out the garbage, right? So that was the whole reason why she felt like, if he can just understand why I'm so triggered and then take this on, I don't have to think about it anymore. It's really interesting.
And I think that really comes down to just the foundational bedrock of the relationship has to be a fluid understanding of your spouse, a constant desire to learn more, to grow more, and to sort of deepen that relationship, and to continually nurture the relationship. And date night, whether it's at 10 o'clock in the morning or lunch or evening or whenever you find time, that time to do nothing other than enjoy each other's company and either switch, enjoy another round of Succession, which is a great show, by the way, or go for a walk or do anything. It's just not to do logistics, not to do planning, not to talk about the challenges or whatever's happening, just to nurture the relationship is key.
And the silver bullet of the system is that. What makes the structure so magnificent is not about accomplishing a task and doing it clinically. It's like that the structure and the format that is so uniquely curated by the couple, because it's only an expression of them, really underscores so much of who we are psychologically, mentally, metaphysically, physically, value orientation. So that's the holy grail. That's the silver bullet of the whole system.
Yep.
With respect to some of the people who are sending in questions, I just want to ask a couple of them. There's a question that says, the system sounds wonderful, but if tasks change every week, it's like you have to recreate the wheel every week. Like you said, you have your calendar and you have to start all over each week. Isn't it better to just have set tasks this person is always responsible for, like picking up from soccer practice, and unless there's an emergency, just do your set tasks?
So it's not, it's the exact opposite of picking up from soccer. It's owning soccer, right? From the minute you think about what league they're joining, right? So let's just frame that. It's the whole thing, not just picking up. So I think to this person's question, you can make the length of time a month. You can shuffle it however you want. She's recommending a week because sometimes you get cards and you're like, I don't really like these tasks. So you get to reshuffle them. But her husband has garbage. I think he had it for 2 months. So it's really an individualized situation.
And I definitely agree. Listen, Rachel's always making the challah. It's not a task that shifts. And I always make the cholent, and I really credit my coach, Kenny, for helping finesse that recipe.
Yes, thank you, Kenny.
But things that do change are on Tuesday at 7:30 who's picking up child number two from fast break on their way home? And can I use the extra time at the office, or do I have to stay late for a meeting? And it's other things. There are certainly constant roles that sit in certain areas, but there are other things which are fluid depending on the week and the other responsibilities that exist.
Yeah, but I think ultimately, again, going back, it's about clearly defined expectations. That's it.
Another question that came out is, how do you nurture your relationship during these times? Any tips on nurturing your own relationships?
I mean, we're certainly spending a lot of time together.
But how are we nurturing our relationships?
I think being a good listener. This is a stressful time. I mean, everyone's job is different, and some jobs are more stressful than others. And certainly if you have people in your life right now that are not well, or God forbid have passed away, it's a stressful time. So I think, cutting everyone like that extra layer of slack, I think having more patience, right? And being a better listener and understanding that it's really not business as usual right now, I think goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think there are so many silver linings of being stuck at home, and certainly everyone has their pressure points, certain parts during the day, multiple times in many instances. But stealing time together, which will never ever happen again, and is so rare, where you can sort of try and give the relationship time that doesn't always happen at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when you're on a break from Zoom calls and meetings, and you can step away and sit, and grab the wedding album, or grab the first album for child number one, and look at their and look at the bris photos, and sort of be nostalgic in a moment, and that's all feeding and nurturing the relationship.
Yes, I think it's a combination of things. There's definitely the element of curiosity, especially as we grow in relationships. Very often, like, intolerance and judgment takes the place of curiosity. So sometimes, but to reapproach from a place of curiosity, from a place of discovery, just the same way we ourselves change, and there are certain preferences and things that we enjoy more, and parts of ourselves that don't get fed as easily, kind of going back to that unicorn space. So one of the things that Daniel and I like to do, and this goes back to that whole KPI quarterly check-in, is look at the kind of the multidimensional facets of any relationship, the love languages, the intellectual stimulation, the emotional stimulation, the psychological stimulation, and look to give those areas the breathing room that they need. And it could be that we're going to read a new book together. It could be that we're going to play a new board game because our brains aren't being challenged enough, so we need to play set. We are playing set. I'm just saying that's on my task of things to do. But that we look at all of the channels of areas that we want to create growth and stimulation, and if it's Jewish text learning, to do that together. Ask each other questions. Unearth what the text is talking about, what the wisdom has to share, so that we go through and engage in those activities in all of those different silos. So whether it's the emotional space, and it's reading an article about the love languages and discussing that, or taking one of those quizzes together about how to become better communicators, but to look at all of those functional inputs, and to think about ways that we can institute the right games, the right thoughts, the right strategies, the right material, and the right content to be able to elevate each of those areas of the relationship. Because ultimately, when we step back, we're dynamic human beings, and we are made up of so many different facets, and making sure that we are both feeding the right amount of food and the right amount of content to the right streams.
Yeah, and the underlying point of all of that is communication, right? It is communication, and it is making sure that you are not internalizing something where you have resentment building up. It's like communicating at the right time, in the right moment, but making sure that those channels stay open.
Right. And we all know with communication, it's really 90% of what you don't say. It's really how you present yourself, and being aware of your spouse. And if you see and sense a body language that there's a reason to give them space, or whatever it is, then figure out how to make that happen, and just a full awareness and a full understanding of the whole.
And I think just to add, text message and email, they're the devil when it comes to communication, right? So address your stuff in person.
Yeah. I think also one of the age-old kind of teachings is about the word ahava love in Hebrew. And the Hebrew language is so deep and so rich in terms of its interpretation and in terms of the wisdom that's embedded into the letters. It's quite profound and phenomenal. It's not just about communication, but it's about what fuels the communication. The word ahava is comprised of the root word hav, which means to give. So if we always look at feeding a relationship from a perspective of giving, then we're always in something where it's 100-100. It's 100%, 100%. It's not 50-50 sharing. It's 100%, 100% giving. And if both parties are doing that thoughtfully, respectfully, intentionally, then we're also both gaining 100%. So, and kind of looking at it in that kind of breakout.
Wow. I think we should end on that. That was an amazing note. I think, Aliza, is there anything you'd like to add to this amazing, I think, an opportunity for us to really hear firsthand how people are managing their lives in the most positive ways as couples, and what we can do to work on our relationships. There was so much here this evening to be left to think about. Aliza, is there anything you want to say before we close?
Well, first of all, thank you, all of you, for such great conversation. It was really a privilege to do this tonight, and I think really, what I think everyone should leave here tonight thinking about is what, are they living their best life? Like, is this the best they can be, feel, do? And if it's not to beat yourself up about it, and not to be like, oh my God, my marriage is terrible, or my home life is terrible. It's like, think about, well, first of all, read the book, because I think it would help immensely, but think about the tactics you heard tonight, and think about maybe a new way to address things, and a new way to be open-minded about what could be. And I think that there's something really exciting about knowing that you can change if you have a willing partner. And I think that, we're all at a point in our lives, life is hard enough, the world is crazy enough. Home needs to be the oasis. And I think it's worth investing in that relationship.
Well said.
Thank you.
Beautifully said. Well, Rachel and Daniel, thank you so much. Aliza, thank you for helping to bring this together.
Pleasure.
And for bringing your entire, this whole concept to the forefront, and to allow us to use this evening to really focus on something so essential and important, especially during this difficult time where we are spending so much time as a family together, and we need to work on our relationships. I encourage everyone to, I have listened to Aliza Licht's podcast. Go on, Leave Your Mark podcast. It is worthwhile. Aliza, as you saw tonight, she's filled with understanding and advice on so many different topics. So please do that. Rachel and Daniel Kraus are giving so many wonderful shiurim, classes, life advice during this time period, as they do all the time. Please go and listen to them. I thank the Ramaz Parents Council for sponsoring this evening, and I thank all of you for joining us, and I wish everybody a healthy and safe continuation to the week. And if we don't see each other again before a Shabbat Shalom, we have a wonderful opportunity tomorrow to those that are in the real estate industry. We have a real estate roundtable that's going to be starting tomorrow at 12:30. We have a great panel of people, and there'll be a lot of opportunity to discuss then various different things. And then there's a wonderful lineup of other classes that we've sent out. So please join us. Again, thank you all for being here this evening, and we look forward to seeing you very soon again. Good night.
Thanks for being the great moderator, Kenny.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Good night.